The illusory truth effect is a psychological phenomenon where repeated statements, regardless of their truthfulness, become more believable over time simply due to their repetition. This cognitive bias occurs because humans are wired to equate repetition with truth. The more frequently a claim is repeated, the more familiar it feels, and the more likely we are to accept it as accurate, even if we initially recognize it as false. This effect is central to how misinformation, propaganda, and falsehoods spread and become accepted by large numbers of people. From political campaigns to marketing strategies, and from media outlets to social media, the illusory truth effect has been used by individuals, organizations, and corporations to manipulate public opinion. Whether it's a false rumor, a biased narrative, or a distorted version of the truth, repeating it enough times can make people begin to believe it. At the heart of the illusory truth effect lies a simple yet powerful mechanism. Familiarity breeds belief. When we hear a statement for the first time, we might question its accuracy, but as we hear it repeated again and again, it starts to feel familiar. And since our brains equate familiarity with truth, we start to believe it. This is a shortcut our brains use to process information more efficiently, but it can lead to dangerous consequences when false information is spread intentionally. In this video, we will explore the origins of the illusory truth effect, the psychological principles behind it, and the ways in which it's exploited in politics, advertising, media, and other aspects of society. We will also discuss how to recognize and resist the illusory truth effect to make more informed decisions in a world where repetition often masquerades as truth. To understand the illusory truth effect, it's essential to delve into the cognitive mechanisms that make repetition so powerful. Several psychological principles explain why repeated information, even if false, becomes more believable. One of the main reasons repetition is so effective is that it creates a sense of cognitive ease. Cognitive ease refers to how easily the brain processes information. When something feels familiar, our brains don't have to work as hard to understand it, making it feel true or reliable. Repetition creates fluency, which means that over time, the statement becomes easier to process and recognize. When we hear or see the same message repeatedly, our brains begin to associate it with truth, because fluency tricks us into thinking that the statement is credible. This is why slogans, jingles, and catchphrases are so effective in advertising. They repeat the message over and over again until it feels second nature, and by extension true. For example, a company might repeatedly advertise that their product is the best on the market. Even if there is little evidence to support this claim, the constant repetition makes consumers associate the product with quality and reliability, simply because they've heard the message so many times. Another factor contributing to the illusory truth effect is the way our memory works. Humans rely on memory retrieval to determine whether something is true or false. When we are exposed to new information, we often compare it to what we already know to judge its accuracy. However, repeated exposure to false information makes it more likely that we will retrieve the repeated statement from memory rather than searching for contradictory facts. As a result, when we are asked whether a repeated statement is true or false, our brains are more likely to pull the repeated information from memory, leading us to conclude that it must be true. The more times we are exposed to a false statement, the stronger the memory becomes, making it increasingly difficult to challenge or debunk. Confirmation bias. The illusory truth effect is also closely linked to confirmation bias, which is the tendency to seek out or interpret information in a way that confirms our existing beliefs. When we hear a statement that aligns with what we already believe, we are more likely to accept it as true, especially if it's repeated multiple times. Repetition strengthens this bias, making it harder for us to consider alternative viewpoints or question the validity of the repeated statement. For example, in political debates, voters may be more likely to accept repeated statements from their preferred candidate, even if those statements are inaccurate or misleading. The repetition of the message, combined with confirmation bias, reinforces their belief in the candidate and their policies. The mere exposure effect is another psychological principle that explains why repeated information feels more believable. This effect refers to the phenomenon where people tend to develop a preference for things simply because they are familiar with them. The more we are exposed to something, whether it's a face, a song, or an idea, the more we like it. When it comes to information, the mere exposure effect makes us more likely to accept repeated statements as true, because we are more familiar with them. Even if we don't necessarily agree with the statement the first time we hear it, repeated exposure makes us more comfortable with it, eventually leading us to accept it as part of our worldview. One of the most dangerous consequences of the illusory truth effect is the way it facilitates the spread of misinformation. In today's media-saturated world, false information can spread rapidly across social media, news outlets, and online forums. When misinformation is repeated enough times, it becomes embedded in the public consciousness, making it difficult to debunk or correct. How misinformation spreads. The internet has made it easier than ever to share information, but it has also created an environment where false information can spread like wildfire. Social media platforms in particular are designed to prioritize content that is engaging, regardless of its accuracy. When a false claim is shared widely and repeatedly, it can quickly gain traction, even if it is not based on facts. For example, a rumor might start as an unverified post on social media, but if it is shared repeatedly by different users, it can create the impression that the claim is widely accepted or credible. Each time someone sees the claim, it becomes more familiar, leading more people to believe it. Once the false information has gained enough momentum, it becomes difficult to counteract with facts, because the repeated message has already taken hold in people's minds. The role of news and media. Repetition is also a powerful tool in the hands of news outlets and media organizations. Whether intentionally or unintentionally, the media can perpetuate the illusory truth effect by repeating the same narratives, talking points, or sound bites over and over again. This is especially true in the 24-hour news cycle, where the need to fill airtime leads to constant repetition of the same stories, often without new information or context. For example, in the lead-up to an election, media outlets might repeatedly focus on a particular narrative or controversy surrounding a candidate. Even if the story is based on incomplete or misleading information, the constant repetition makes it feel more significant or true, influencing how voters perceive the candidate. The more a narrative is repeated, the harder it becomes to challenge, even when facts or evidence emerge that contradict it. Political propaganda and repetition. The illusory truth effect has long been a cornerstone of political propaganda. Political leaders and regimes throughout history have used repetition to shape public opinion, control narratives, and maintain power. By repeating certain slogans, phrases, or ideas, they can create a sense of inevitability or truth, even when the statements are false or misleading. For example, authoritarian governments often use state-controlled media to repeat propaganda messages that reinforce the regime's legitimacy or demonize its enemies. By repeating these messages across multiple platforms, newspapers, radio, television, and speeches, the government creates an environment where dissenting voices are drowned out, and the repeated narrative becomes the accepted truth. Even in democratic societies, political campaigns use repetition to sway voters. By repeating campaign slogans, policy positions, or attacks on opponents, candidates can shape the narrative around an election. The more a particular message is repeated, the more likely it is to stick in voters' minds, influencing their decisions at the polls. Chapter 3. Repetition in Advertising and Marketing. Repetition is one of the most effective strategies used in advertising and marketing to shape consumer behavior. Advertisers rely on repetition to create brand awareness, establish brand loyalty, and convince consumers that their products are superior to those of their competitors. The power of slogans and catchphrases. One of the most common ways that advertisers use repetition is through slogans and catchphrases. By repeating the same catchy phrase or slogan in commercials, billboards, and online ads, companies can create a strong association between the product and the message. Over time, the repetition makes the slogan feel familiar, and consumers begin to believe that the product embodies the qualities described in the slogan. For example, a fast food chain might use the slogan, "Always fresh," "Always fast" in all of its marketing materials. Even if the food isn't particularly fresh or fast, the constant repetition of the slogan creates the illusion that the company lives up to this promise. Consumers who hear the slogan repeatedly may be more likely to choose this chain over others, simply because they've internalized the message. Brand recognition and loyalty. Repetition is also crucial for building brand recognition and loyalty. When consumers are repeatedly exposed to a brand's logo, name, or product, they become more familiar with it, and familiarity breeds trust. This is why companies invest heavily in advertising campaigns that ensure their brand is visible across multiple platforms, from TV commercials to social media ads to product placement in movies and TV shows. For example, a smartphone company might launch a massive advertising campaign in which their logo and product are featured in commercials, online ads, and even influencer endorsements. Over time, consumers become more familiar with the brand, making them more likely to consider it when purchasing a new phone. The more they see the brand, the more they trust it, even if they haven't researched its features or compared it to competitors. Creating a sense of urgency. Repetition is also used in marketing to create a sense of urgency or scarcity, prompting consumers to make quick decisions without fully evaluating their options. Advertisers often repeat messages like "limited time only," or "while supplies last," to pressure consumers into buying a product before they miss out. By repeating these urgency-based messages, advertisers can tap into consumers' fear of missing out, or FOMO. The more times consumers hear that a deal is limited or exclusive, the more likely they are to act on impulse, believing that they need to buy the product before it's too late. Repetition makes the message feel urgent, even if the deal is not as limited as it seems. Repetition is not only used in advertising and marketing, but is also a central feature of how media and news organizations shape public perception and control the narrative. The repetition of talking points. In both politics and media, talking points are often repeated to frame an issue or reinforce a particular viewpoint. These talking points are carefully crafted messages that are designed to be repeated across interviews, speeches, and media appearances. By repeating the same phrases or ideas over and over again, politicians and pundits can influence how the public understands an issue. For example, during an election campaign, a political party might use specific talking points to criticize their opponent or promote their own policies. These talking points are repeated across multiple platforms, from speeches to TV interviews to social media posts. The more these talking points are repeated, the more likely the public is to accept them as true or important, even if they are based on distorted or incomplete information. "24-hour news cycles and repetition." The rise of 24-hour news cycles has made repetition an even more pervasive feature of modern media. With news channels needing to fill airtime around the clock, stories are often repeated throughout the day, with the same footage, sound bites, and commentary being shown over and over again. This constant repetition can shape how viewers perceive the news, even if the story lacks new developments. For example, if a news outlet covers a crime repeatedly throughout the day, viewers may begin to believe that crime is on the rise, or that the issue is more pressing than it actually is. The repetition of the story makes it feel more urgent, even if the overall context, such as declining crime rates, is not reported. The illusory truth effect has become even more pronounced with the advent of social media, where repeated messages can spread rapidly, and gain widespread visibility. Social media platforms, driven by algorithms that prioritize engagement, often amplify content that is shared, liked, and commented on the most, leading to repeated exposure to the same messages. Echo chambers and repetition. One of the defining features of social media is the creation of echo chambers, where users are primarily exposed to content that aligns with their existing beliefs. In these echo chambers, the same messages, narratives, and viewpoints are repeated and reinforced by others within the group. The more users see the same content, the more likely they are to believe it, regardless of its accuracy. For example, if a political group repeatedly shares the same memes, articles, and videos promoting a particular candidate, the group's members may begin to accept these messages as truth. Over time, the repetition of the same content within the echo chamber solidifies the group's collective belief in the narrative, making it difficult to introduce alternative viewpoints or challenge the group's assumptions. Viral misinformation. Social media also facilitates the rapid spread of viral misinformation. When false claims or rumors are repeated by multiple users, they can quickly gain traction and become widely accepted, even if they are completely baseless. The more times a piece of misinformation is shared, the more legitimate it appears to those who encounter it. For example, a false claim about a celebrity or public figure might start as a rumor on social media, but as it is shared and reposted by others, it can take on a life of its own. Each time the claim is repeated, it becomes more familiar to users, leading them to believe it's true. Even if the claim is later debunked, the repetition has already done its damage, as many users will continue to believe the false information. While repetition can be a useful tool for learning and memory, the illusory truth effect poses significant dangers when it comes to the spread of misinformation, propaganda, and false narratives. One of the most significant dangers of the illusory truth effect is the erosion of critical thinking. When people are exposed to repeated false information, they may become less likely to question the validity of the claims or seek out alternative sources of information. Over time, the repetition creates a false sense of certainty, making it harder for individuals to think critically about the issue. For example, if a repeated claim about a political issue is accepted as true by a large segment of the population, it becomes difficult for those who hold different views to challenge the narrative. The repeated message creates a sense of consensus, even if it is based on false information. The illusory truth effect can also undermine trust in important institutions, such as the media, government, and science. When repeated false claims are spread about these institutions, it can create a sense of distrust or skepticism, even when the claims are not supported by evidence. For example, if a repeated narrative suggests that the media is biased or corrupt, people may become less likely to trust legitimate news sources. This erosion of trust makes it harder for the public to access reliable information and make informed decisions. Polarization and division. Repetition of false or misleading information can also contribute to polarization and division within society. When people are repeatedly exposed to the same narratives within their echo chambers, they become more entrenched in their beliefs, making it difficult to engage in meaningful dialogue with those who hold different views. For example, in political debates, repeated attacks on opposing candidates or parties can create a climate of hostility, where compromise and collaboration are seen as weaknesses. The repeated narrative of us versus them makes it harder for individuals to find common ground, leading to further polarization. Conclusion: how to recognize and resist the illusory truth effect. The illusory truth effect is a powerful cognitive bias that can lead us to believe false information simply because we hear it repeated over and over again. In a world where information is constantly being repeated through media, advertising, social media, and political discourse, It's important to be aware of how repetition influences our beliefs and decisions. Recognizing the illusory truth effect. Here are some signs that you may be falling victim to the illusory truth effect. Familiarity feels like truth. If you find yourself believing something simply because it feels familiar, rather than because it is backed by evidence, you may be experiencing the illusory truth effect. Repetition without verification. Be cautious of repeated claims that are not supported by reliable sources or evidence. Just because you've heard something multiple times doesn't make it true. Resisting the illusory truth effect. To resist the illusory truth effect, practice critical thinking and seek out diverse sources of information. When you encounter repeated claims, ask yourself, is there evidence to support this claim? Don't rely on repetition alone to determine truth. Look for facts, data, and reliable sources to verify the information. Who benefits from this message? Consider whether the repeated message serves a particular agenda or benefits a specific group. By questioning repeated information and making decisions based on evidence rather than familiarity, you can avoid falling into the trap of the illusory truth effect and make more informed choices.
Remember to like and subscribe for more video content. Sapiens quae vigilat.